Hey, Orchard Grove family. Happy Sunday to you and to your family. Happy holidays. And as we just begin this season of life, the season of giving, we're doing a series on giving. And I think it's so appropriate for us to pause at a time when maybe a lot of people can think of reasons to not be thankful, to be thankful, and to find out what real giving is all about. And years ago, I did a series called Live to Give. And I thought it's been so many years since I did that, and I wanted to do another one like that. But instead of calling it Live to Give, I decided I want to call this one Give to Live. And last week when we introduced the idea, it's because giving really makes us alive. It brings us to life. And when we shut down, when we stop giving, we stagnate our lives. And so this week, I want to start by reading some scriptures, and just to kind of get our minds in the thought of what Jesus talked about, what Paul talked about, what the scriptures in general talked about, because giving seems to be a thread through the entire all of the scriptures. Jesus says, "Freely you have received, freely give." Now, as we talk about giving during this series, I don't want you to think about one aspect or one kind of giving. That is, don't just think about money. Don't just think about one aspect, but think about giving in all of its aspects. You could be giving time. You could be giving a kind word. Freely you have received, freely give. So it starts with the assumption that we've already received. And I think that's an important place to start. We've already received so much. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 9:7, give cheerfully, right? Never give grudgingly, but give from a cheerful heart. God loves a cheerful giver. That is to say, give because you want to, because it's in your heart to. And we're going to talk about that today as well. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 8, verse 12, it's not about giving what you don't have. God never asks us to give anything that we don't have, but to give out of what we have, what God has already given us. So there again, it's never about feeling guilty or stressed. Giving should never stress you out. Giving should come freely from your heart. God says, or in 2 Corinthians, Paul writes, God who supplies seed to the sower. And because he does that, he will increase the store of your seed. So it's likening giving to sowing seed in the ground. And if that's what it's like, that you're putting seed into the ground, God's going to increase the store of that seed. So you can be generous on every occasion. In all kinds of ways you can be generous. Jesus says in Luke 6:38, give and it will come back to you. Shaken down, pressed together, running over. That's just an abundantly. When you give, God abundantly gives it back to you. Malachi says, bring the tithe into the storehouse. If we have time today, we'll talk about the tithe. What is that? Where did that come from? Is that something to feel guilty about or something to feel grateful for? But it's the first portion. In those days, it would have been of your crops or of your flocks, and you give the first portion away. And there's a great story that we will visit if we have time, where Abraham goes off to war, and he's going to rescue his nephew Lot. And when he goes to rescue him, he feels like God gave him favor, and so he gave 1/10 of all that he conquered during his venture to recover Lot. He gives to Melchizedek, the priest. He's giving to God, saying, I think God gave me favor here. So this is a rich and a deep tradition, probably one that we're too easily to dismiss because we don't understand how rich tithing is to our own lives, that we start to understand what we've been given, what we've received is from God, and so we return the first of it. In 1 Timothy, Paul writes, God's given us all these things for our enjoyment. God wants us to enjoy. He's blessed us. But he says he wants us to be rich in good deeds and to share, and not to hoard, but to pass on the blessings that God's given us. We give to God because everything comes from him. 1 Chronicles 29:14, everything comes from you. In Proverbs 11:29, a generous man prospers. He who refreshes others will himself be refreshed. It's like when you give someone else a cold glass of water, you yourself get the refreshment. And I mean, we could just go on and on and on with all of the scriptures that talk about how God encourages us to be givers. But today I want to talk about why is it that giving makes you feel so good. I don't know if you've had this experience, but I hope you have. So many people that have been with us at Orchard Grove on different mission trips or outreach trips or just outpouring of love, generosity. Why does that make you feel so good? Why do you feel good when you give? I mean, on countless trips I've been on and taken people on, they talk about this incredible feeling they have. And I think there's a reason for that. There's a reason that giving makes you feel so good. I know back when I was in high school, I had my first taste, I think, of this experience. I went with our church. I was a young high school student. I went with our church on a mission trip to Jamaica. And I never had an experience like this. But of course, we didn't go to the resorts that maybe many of you have seen or experienced. But we went up into the hills to some very incredibly impoverished areas. I remember how we were asked to go door to door through these incredibly I wouldn't call them neighborhoods, just shacks, just kind of corrugated metal, maybe cinder blocks if someone was fortunate. And we would go from house to house. We didn't know any of these people, and we would just ask them, is there anything that you want us to pray for you? And I mean, of course, in a wealthy place in America or somewhere else, people would just tell you to get lost, but they would invite us into their home because the poor have a different approach to life than the rich. Let's just be honest. And they would invite us in, and we would begin to pray for people, asking them about their needs. And we would go back every single day while we were there and pray for them. And I just remember how it affected me in a profound way. It actually changed the course of my life, I think, because when I left that trip, I decided that was something I wanted to give my life to. And I from that point on, made decisions. I wanted to go off and go to a Bible college, and I pointed my life in that direction. And I think I did because of the incredible feeling that I had. I don't think I ever had a feeling like that. And I was in high school. I mean, I had all kinds of things that you might think make you feel good, playing football or homecoming, all of these kinds of things that people think this is going to give you the greatest feeling in the world. But nothing compared to that feeling. And I remember there was this really old man, he couldn't walk, and I would sit with him during the church services at night, and we didn't even have a floor. I remember it was stone or gravel or something, and I sat on the floor with him because he couldn't walk, and prayed with him, and how that experience changed my life forever. I wanted to always feel that feeling, the feeling of giving. And I think there's a reason for it. It's not just some sentimental thing. Giving is not just a sentimental, like a romanticized holiday ideal. But if I could just suggest a couple of things, maybe to get us thinking that giving is bigger than a season, it's bigger than a holiday. That giving is actually, can I say this? It's the structure of God. And hold on for a minute. If you're not a believer, you say, man, I knew you were going to say something like this. If you're not a believer in God, then hold on a minute. You can substitute God for reality itself or life itself, because once you start to study the nature of reality itself, you will find that it's all a flow of giving. In fact, today I want to call the message, go with the flow. That is to say, it feels good to give because you're in the flow of God, or you're in the flow of life itself. That's how life is structured. You know, years ago, after Jesus walked on the earth, people were trying to make sense of his words. You know, like in John's gospel, he says, I'm in the Father, and the Father is in me. And yet he would pray to the Father as if the Father was over there, and yet refer to being in the Father and the Father in him. And then he'd say, I am in you and you are in me. There's all this, I guess, mystical kind of talk from Jesus. What did he actually mean? What was he talking about? And later on, they tried to piece it all together. And what they came up with was what they threw a term out called the Trinity. Now, 1,500 years later, people have heard that term countless times. In fact, we're kind of bored with it. It just is some abstract meaning that I guess that's the nature of God. But it was actually Paul Young who wrote a book called The Shack. By the way, I don't know how many, but the last I saw was 22 million copies sold. It must have awakened something in us about the nature of God. That God is not just some monarch on a throne, but the Trinitarian nature is important. Now, a lot of people, this word doesn't mean much to you, and that's actually okay. It doesn't matter that the word means anything or not. It's not even in the Bible. But if we begin to understand that God the Father outpours himself in the Son, and the Son pours himself in the Spirit, and the Spirit pours into the Father, and there's this continual flow of giving, one outpouring or sort of emptying. One empties himself into the other, and no one ever panics thinking, is my cup going to be full? But one cup's emptied and the next one's filled, and the next one's emptied and the next one's filled. And there's a continual cycle or flow. That's when you start to understand what the Trinity is all about. It makes us feel good because this is the nature of God. And by the way, this is what science is learning is the nature of the universe, the nature of everything. Did you know that you and me and everything around me, whether it's this Christmas tree or this cement building over here, everything is made up of atoms, and that they're actually moving? It's unbelievable. I mean, if you looked at any of these things, you'd say they're static, they're still, which is how people thought of God for a long time. But what we learn is that it's all a flow. Everything's constantly moving, and when it stops, it stagnates. When it stops, it dies. Can you believe it? This cement building, there's actually subatomic particles flowing constantly. It's mind-blowing. But if you think of life as stagnant, you won't be a giver. But if you realize that all of life is constantly moving and God is this continual outpouring, then guess what? You will become a giver too, because you understand that's just how life works. It's the nature of life. The other side is as true as well. When you stop giving, you stagnate and you start dying. You start feeling like you're dying. The second year, my church experience in high school, as a high school student, they went on another trip. And so I immediately said, I want to go. I want to be a part of this, missions trip. And so I went. The funny thing is, I didn't have the same experience. They had a choir they organized, and I didn't think of myself as much of a singer, so I didn't join the choir. And what I learned when I got there was that this choir was going to be the main focus, and they were doing all of these concerts, and so those of us that weren't a part, we didn't have much to give, much to do, and it felt so terrible to not be a part of the giving. And I remember that feeling. I never lost it, because it was such a contrast for me. It's like sitting out in a game, there's no good feeling there. And so it seems, made us to give, made that to be our primary experience. And so if we want to participate in the flow of God, we have to stay in the game. We have to stay giving. I guess that's the best way of saying it. Now think about this. When you think about your own life, when you felt the best, wasn't it when you were giving? And doesn't that tell us something about what our lives should be about? Not receiving, because we've already received. And yes, we want to continue to receive because that's how it works. God's goodness flows to us and we let it flow to others. That's how the structure of life and the structure of God is. And so when you stop participating, when you clog it up, then all of a sudden you're missing out on what it's all about. Now, I want to talk about giving, not in one dimension, but in every dimension of our lives. Because sometimes people don't realize, whether it's in our relationships, whether it's in work. You say, well, I work just to get my paycheck. I'm not there to give. I'm there to do my job and to leave. Then I think you miss out on what it's all about. Whether it's work or home, relationships, it's all about giving. And you can't calculate every single part of what comes back to you. Do you remember the story you visited last week, the story of Cain and Abel? I mean, what an amazing story, And we learned that there were two different approaches to life. Cain, who means, his very name, the idea of that way of life is it means to possess, right? To take. But that's not what God made us to be, not just takers. We're supposed to be givers, right? And so if we take the approach of Cain, who gave but didn't really want to give, and it wasn't really from his heart, then he missed out on what life is all about. So giving always has to flow from our heart. It always starts there. It starts on the inside. Remember when Jesus said, sometimes what religion does is it starts on the outside. And so he got into a lot of conflict with the religious leaders because he didn't do a lot of the external things that they wanted him to do. He wasn't always keeping the Sabbath. He wasn't always washing. He was hanging around the wrong kinds of people that weren't allowed in his religious system. And so he always butted heads with the religious leaders. And Jesus said, you Pharisees, you're missing it. It's like you're cleaning the outside of the cup. That's what religion does. It's cleaning the outside. But what part of the cup needs to be cleaned the most? The inside. I mean, if you clean the outside, it looks good, right? Which is what a lot of religion is about, looking good on the outside. But what you have to do, Jesus said, is you have to clean the inside of the cup. That's where giving starts. It starts on the inside. It starts from the heart. That way you don't have to fake anything. You don't have to force anything. That's what a lot of religion is. It's faked and it's forced. But when heart giving takes over, it changes you. Did you know, by the way, that the heart is actually in so many ways more powerful than the brain? Science is now teaching us. We're learning so much about the heart. There's a whole institute. They study the heart and how it sends, get this, your heart sends more signals to your brain than your brain sends to your heart. That what we're learning is what Jesus taught us all along, is that everything starts in the heart, that's where it's all at. Proverbs, it says, above all else, right? Guard your heart. It's the wellspring of life. Jesus says, love God with all of your heart. It's the heart that matters the most. They're now saying that, I think the electromagnetic field of the heart is something like 5,000 times greater than the brain. When your heart is full of gratitude, it's expanding literally an electromagnetic field. That's why they say this person has bad energy. You ever said that or heard that? Sure, because it's like their heart is constricted and they're giving off bad vibes. Isn't that funny how musicians would pick up on this stuff and sing about it? Because it's intuitive. We know there's something wrong with this person's heart, or there's something right with this person's heart. So what do? Well, we just start with this awareness that God's blessed us, that we've received so much, and that we should be generous, and we should open our heart. And when our heart's open, then we're in the flow of life. So today, before we close, I just want you to think about, what are the kinds of things that you can give? Think about it. Has anyone ever encouraged you? I mean, just stopped and said some great and amazing things to you? I mean, it feels so good when people encourage you, doesn't it? Your heart feels better. You feel lifted up. What if you encourage somebody? That same feeling that someone gave you, you could give to them. Write them a note. Give them a nice text message. Call them on the phone. Go, talk to them, have coffee with them, and just give encouragement to them. It can be life-changing when someone encourages you. It fills your cup, right? And you can fill someone else's cup. How about this? A listening ear. Instead of saying things to them, which is awesome, listen to them. Give them empathy by listening to them. Just let them talk. Ask them questions about themselves. That's an amazing gift, the gift of empathy, the gift of listening, the gift of understanding. How about this? How about giving someone a break? Just cutting them some slack. Not nailing them to the wall because they said the wrong thing or they did the wrong thing. Haven't we all done that? Haven't we all been in the wrong? And we needed someone to just give us a break, just kind of cut us some slack. I mean, I think one of the great things that we could do for someone is just, remember in the Gospel of John, the woman who's caught, right? And she's caught in the act of adultery, and all the religious people want to stone her. They want Jesus to stone her, and they're so quick to judge. And Jesus says, he who is without sin, throw the first stone. In other words, sometimes you have to give people a break. It's just giving them forgiveness, right? Give is in the middle of the word forgiveness. That's such an important thing to give. So let me end today's message by just saying this. What if things aren't going good for you and you're not feeling like giving, feeling grateful? Let me just give a suggestion. Take whatever little bit that you have and plant that as a seed. So when you don't feel good or when you have a need, what you do is you plant a seed, right? Because you know that if you plant a seed in the farming, it's going to come back to you, and it's going to be way bigger and way better than the little seed that you planted. So if you don't have much, you're not feeling much, you're not feeling good, maybe you're not feeling good in a relationship, plant some seeds. Just find some good that you can do and drop it in. Kind words, good thoughts, whatever it is, plant some seeds and see what will happen as the seed comes back to you. As we go to the holiday season, we think God loved so that he gave his son. We're celebrating the greatest gift ever given. I want you to remember this. Plant seeds whenever you feel the worst. When you feel the lowest, find some way to give something. Just give an encouraging word to somebody. Don't isolate. Don't block yourself out of the flow. That's what a lot of people do when they don't feel good. They step away from the flow. You have to stay in the flow of life. Go with the flow. Don't fight it. Just give a little bit. Get on the phone and give one encouraging word to somebody and see what will happen. People always say that, I wasn't going to come to this event. I was just not feeling good. I'm so glad that I did. Why? Because you were making a decision about stepping out of the flow or staying in the flow. And you always win when you stay in. You always win when you stay in. Stay in the flow of life. And the flow is constant giving, constant outpouring. Start with the heart and plant a seed whenever you feel a need. Plant a seed. That's the key to life. Now, remember, it's not just live to give. It's a great motto. Let it be the motto of your life. But give to live. That is to say, if you don't give, you're going to die. That's what kills us when we stop giving. So I wish you the very best. And I know if you pause and meditate and think hard enough, you'll realize that God's been good to you. God's given to you. So keep giving and keep living like never before. God bless you, Orchard Grove.